On August 9th, 1997, 6-year-old Amelia Carter vanished from the family's farmhouse on the outskirts of Willow Creek, Nebraska. She had been playing in the yard that afternoon, her small red bicycle leaning against the porch. Its back was still spinning when her mother, Evelyn Carter, came outside to call her in for supper. By the time Evelyn reached the steps, Amelia was gone. The trail went cold almost immediately. No witnesses. No forced entry. Just the eerie silence of the Nebraska fields stretching endlessly in every direction. A search party combed the woods, the creek beds, and the cornfields. Dogs picked up a faint scent near the old windmill road, but evaporated as quickly as it had appeared. The town had nothing but flyers stapled to telephone poles, Amelia's smile fading with the summer sun. Days became weeks. Weeks turned into months. And slowly, Willow Creek returned to its routines. But for Evelyn Carter, life stopped on that August evening. The farmhouse that once echoed with laughter turned into a mausoleum of silence, each room preserved like a shrine to a child who might never come home. On the doorframe of Amelia's bedroom, a faint pencil mark sat frozen at 3 feet, 10 inches, the last height measurement Evelyn had written before her daughter disappeared. Neighbors whispered that Evelyn spent hours sitting on Amelia's bed, stroking the worn quilt with its pattern of bluebirds and yellow daisies. Some swore they saw her standing at the edge of the cornfield at night, calling her daughter's name into the darkness long after the search parties had given up. But the whispers didn't stop at grief. In a town as small as Willow Creek, suspicion takes root quickly. The sheriff's office launched a full investigation. Deputies canvassed every house within 20 miles, questioned farmhands, truck drivers, and drifters passing through. But the lack of evidence was a curse. When there are no answers, people make their own. And soon, the eyes of Willow Creek turned to Evelyn herself. Some said she had been too calm in the early days of the search. Others recalled strained finances, an absent husband who had left years before, and an isolated life on the farm. At the corner diner, over chipped coffee cups, people speculated in hushed tones. Maybe she snapped, one farmer muttered. Maybe the kid wandered off and she covered it up, another said. Evelyn learned to walk into the grocery store with her chin high, even as mothers pulled their children closer when she passed. But no one felt the weight of the unanswered questions more than Evelyn herself. She replayed that afternoon in her mind over and over again. Amelia's giggle as she chased a butterfly across the yard. The sound of the cicadas buzzing in the heavy August heat. The moment she stepped inside to turn off the stove, no more than 2 minutes, and came back out to find the yard empty. 2 minutes. That was all it had taken for her world to collapse. By winter, the search parties dwindled. The last flyer curled and peeled on the town's bulletin board. The sheriff's updates became less frequent until there were none at all. The silence that settled over the Carter farmhouse was suffocating. Evelyn moved through the rooms like a ghost, speaking to no one, answering the phone only when it rang with a tip that inevitably led nowhere. She learned the cruel rhythm of grief, the way hope flared with every new lead, only to be crushed again. The way each season sharpened the absence. Amelia's 7th birthday with no candles to blow out. Her classmates moving on to 2nd grade, while her desk sat empty. But Evelyn could not let go. She could not stop searching, even as the years stretched ahead like a barren road with no end in sight. The town eventually stopped asking questions. The sheriff's office moved on to new cases. But the farmhouse remained a place of mourning, frozen in time. The little red bicycle rusted on the porch, its chain eaten away by years of weather. The pencil mark on the doorframe never rose higher. And Evelyn Carter, once a vibrant woman with a quick laugh and an open heart, became a shell. Yet deep inside her, a spark of faith flickered, a fragile, stubborn belief that Amelia was still out there somewhere, alive, waiting, because the alternative was unthinkable. What no one in Willow Creek could have imagined, as summer turned to fall and fall into winter, was that Amelia Carter's story was not over. It was only just beginning. By the winter of 1997, the Carter farmhouse had become more than a place of tragedy. It was a local legend in the making. The white paint on the siding had begun to peel in long, curling strips. The windows glowed dimly at night, only when Evelyn allowed a single lamp to burn in Amelia's room. People driving down County Road 6 slowed their cars, craning their necks to glimpse the house where the Carter girl had disappeared. At first, Willow Creek had rallied. Volunteers scoured the cornfields in neat rows, flashlights bobbing in the night, like a constellation of hope. Mothers packed sandwiches for search parties. Farmers on tractors scanned their acreage, calling Amelia's name into the wind. The local church held vigils, candles flickering against stained glass, hymns carrying the sorrow of a town that felt both wounded and bewildered. But hope fades fast in small towns, and whispers move even faster. By the spring of 1998, a quiet cruelty had taken root. At the corner booths of the Willow Creek diner, gossip flowed as freely as the burnt coffee poured by waitresses in faded pink uniforms. 8 years. They'll still be talking about it, muttered one rancher, his voice low but sharp enough to cut. Mark my words, that mama knows more than she lets on. Across the aisle, a pair of school teachers exchanged glances, lowering their voices. She's always been strange, Evelyn, never one for company. Some say she barely cried after the girl went missing, almost like she expected it. What began as grief shared by neighbors warped into suspicion, then into a quiet, biting accusation that clung to Evelyn like smoke. Sheriff Raymond Dalton tried to quell the rumors. A stout man with thinning hair and a reputation for stubbornness, he made a show of visiting Evelyn often, his cruiser parked conspicuously in her gravel drive. But the absence of answers gnawed at him too. In his office, with his walls cluttered by old hunting trophies and a crooked American flag, he sifted through the evidence for the 100th time. A child's bicycle, chain rusting. A pair of small sneakers found abandoned in the yard. No footprints leading away. No fingerprints other than Evelyn's. The sheer emptiness of the case frustrated him more than any lead gone cold. In the absence of evidence, the human mind invents. Evelyn felt it everywhere she went. At the grocery store, mothers clutched their children's hands tighter when she walked past. The cashier, once friendly, now avoided eye contact as she scanned Evelyn's purchases. Bread, canned soup, occasionally a small bag of candy that no one else knew she would later place, unopened on Amelia's pillow. She could not escape the stares. The whispers, the faint but deliberate way conversations fell silent when she entered a room. To them, Evelyn Carter wasn't just a grieving mother anymore. She was a woman with secrets. The farmhouse grew lonelier with every passing day. Evelyn's nights stretched long and sleepless. She would sit by the window, staring at the endless sweep of cornfields under the moonlight, convinced she saw a flicker of movement at the tree-line. A shadow, a figure, maybe even a child. She would rush out barefoot, heart pounding, only to find nothing but the low rustle of stalks swaying in the night wind. Still, she left the porch light burning. Always, just in case Amelia found her way home. In 1999, the sheriff called Evelyn into his office for what he claimed was a routine check-in. She sat stiffly in the wooden chair opposite his desk, her hands folded tight, as he asked questions that no longer sounded like concern, but like interrogation. Evelyn, you sure there wasn't an argument that day? Nothing unusual at all. No. You didn't see any vehicles on the road? Strangers passing through? No. And you didn't lose track of them more often than that day? The implication was clear, and Evelyn felt the sting deep in her chest. When she left, heads turned as she walked past the deputies' desks. One muttered something under his breath that she couldn't quite catch. She didn't need to. She knew what they all thought. Years rolled on. The missing posters faded and peeled from telephone poles, their corners curling with rain and heat. Children who once had been Amelia's classmates grew into teenagers, their faces lengthening, their voices deepening. They stopped asking questions about the girl who had once shared their classroom. But Evelyn never stopped. Each year on Amelia's birthday, she baked a cake. Small, simple, with 6 candles and 7, then 8. She sat at the kitchen table, the air heavy with silence, and blew them out herself. The farmhouse, once filled with music, now echoed only with ritual. Baking, searching, waiting. By 2001, the town's whispers had hardened into a narrative of their own making. The Carter case became a cautionary tale, retold in hushed tones. The little girl who vanished, the mother who knew more than she said. And yet, even in the darkest moments, Evelyn clung to a stubborn faith. She told herself that every whisper, every sideways glance, every cruel suspicion would be worth it if one day Amelia walked back to the farmhouse door. What Evelyn did not know, what none of Willow Creek could have imagined, was that their whispers were not the end of the story. They were only the beginning of a truth that would resurface in ways no one was prepared to face. The farmhouse at the edge of Willow Creek stood like a monument to grief. From the outside, it looked unchanged, white paint weathered gray, the porch sagging under the weight of years, and fields stretching endlessly behind it. But inside, the air carried something heavier than dust. It was a silence, not the soft, peaceful quiet of rural Iowa, but silence that pressed against the walls, seeped into floorboards, and wrapped itself around Evelyn Carter like a shroud. Every room held a ghost. Amelia's bedroom, frozen in time, remained untouched. The small bed neatly made, stuffed animals arranged in a line, the faded wallpaper stars, and moons peeling at the corners. The closet door hung slightly ajar, a pink sweater still dangling from its hanger. Evelyn couldn't bring herself to move anything, as if disturbing the space would erase the last traces of her daughter's presence. The house had once been filled with laughter. Evelyn remembered the sound of Amelia's feet pattering down the hallway, her voice calling out, "Mama, come see." Those echoes still clung faintly to the walls, cruel reminders of what had been stolen. At night, Evelyn would lie awake in bed, staring at the ceiling, straining to hear something beyond the cicadas and distant train whistles. More than once, she swore she heard the creak of floorboards or the faint hum of a child's voice, but when she rose and searched, the house remained empty. The silence was not absence. It was presence without explanation. Evelyn developed rituals to survive the years. She cleaned Amelia's room every Saturday, dusting each toy with reverence, smoothing the blanket until no crease remained. On Sundays, she walked the rows of corn that bordered the property, scanning the tree-line for signs of figure, a flash of movement. Every May 14th, she returned to the elementary school where Amelia vanished. She would stand at the edge of the playground, the bright colors of the slides and swings faded, but still standing. Children she did not know played there, their laughter sharp against her memories. Parents watched her from a distance, whispering, wondering why the Carter woman still came after all these years. They did not understand. Evelyn wasn't just remembering. She was searching. Bills piled on the kitchen counter. Foreclosure notices slipped through the mail slot with mechanical regularity. Evelyn ignored them. Money was a problem for the living, and she lived in a state between worlds. Her refrigerator often sat nearly empty, a loaf of bread, a carton of milk, half-used jars. But she always kept one item stocked, a small carton of chocolate pudding cups. They had been Amelia's favorite. Sometimes, late at night, Evelyn would peel one open and set it on the kitchen table with a spoon, waiting. In the morning, it would remain untouched, the surface thickened with a skin of sugar. She would eat it herself, spoonful by spoonful, tasting both sweetness and bitterness in equal measure. Outside, the farm itself began to decay. The barn roof sagged, weeds overtook the gravel drive, and the fields, once carefully tended by Evelyn's late husband, grew patchy and wild. Neighbors offered to help, but their kindness carried the weight of judgment. She refused. To Evelyn, the farmhouse was more than land or lumber. It was Amelia's last known world. As long as she stayed, there was still a thread tethering her to the girl she had lost. To leave was unthinkable. Occasionally, law enforcement reopened the case. Sheriff Dalton would call, his tone both weary and perfunctory. Mrs. Carter were running some new checks. Advances in DNA, that sort of thing. She always answered the same way. "Have you found her?" A pause. "No, ma'am. Not yet." Each, "not yet," chipped away at her, but Evelyn clung to those two words. They meant the case wasn't closed, that somewhere Amelia might still exist. But the sheriff's visits grew less frequent. The search party stopped. The newspapers moved on. The town buried the story under new tragedies, new scandals. Only Evelyn refused to let time erase her daughter. By 2004, the 10th anniversary of Amelia's disappearance, Evelyn sat alone in the farmhouse with a single candle burning on the kitchen table. She whispered a prayer into the silence, her voice breaking. "Where are you, baby? Please let me find you." The flame flickered, guttered, then flared again. For a fleeting moment, Evelyn swore she felt warmth brush her cheek, as if a small hand had reached out from the dark. The years blurred. 2005, 2006, 2007, each marked not by milestones but by absence. Evelyn's hair streaked gray. Her hands grew thinner, but the photo of Amelia on the mantel, gap-toothed grin, hair in pigtails, never changed. The girl remained 9 years old, forever frozen in time. And then, in the summer of 2012, fate intervened. A fire swept across a section of the Kester farm just outside Willow Creek. Flames chewed through the tall grass and brambles that had overtaken the far corner of the land. Firefighters worked quickly, stamping out embers, spraying water until the smoke lifted. When the haze cleared, something metallic gleamed from beneath the scorched earth. A hatch, heavy, rusted, set flush into the ground like a secret waiting to be uncovered. The silence of Evelyn's life was about to be shattered. The fire on the Kester property had burned quick and mean. Flames whipped across the brittle grass, leaping into brambles that had swallowed the old cornfield. By the time the last embers hissed under the spray of the fire hoses, a blackened scar remained, the acrid smell of smoke clinging heavy in the air. Fire Chief Warren Hale squinted through the haze as his crew swept the field for flare-ups. That's when he saw it, a dull glint against the scorched soil. At first, he thought it was scrap metal, maybe the rusted lid of an old barrel. But as the ash cleared, the shape became undeniable. It was a hatch, a square of corroded steel, bolted into the ground, flush with the earth as though it had been deliberately hidden. "Chief!" one of the firefighters called, pointing with his gloved hand. "You seeing this?" The men gathered around. None of them spoke. The hatch seemed to radiate unease, its presence unnatural in the middle of the burned field. One of the younger firefighters, Todd Becker, reached down and brushed away more soot, revealing a heavy handle set into the metal. "Looks like a storm shelter," Todd muttered. "Storm shelter my ass." Another said, "This thing's been sealed up tight." Sheriff Dalton arrived within the hour, his patrol car crunching over the gravel. He stepped out, hat pulled low against the sun, sweat beading on his temples. He'd seen his fair share of strange finds in rural Iowa. Meth labs and barns, stolen cars rusting in ditches. But the hatch was something else entirely. "What in God's name is this?" he asked, crouching down. He ran his fingers over the rusted edge, the steel rough against the skin. No markings, no hinges visible, just a handle, fused with corrosion. Dalton straightened, scanning the field. The fire had burned back decades of overgrowth, exposing something the earth had been guarding. Something that wasn't meant to be found. Word spread quickly. By evening, neighbors had gathered at the edge of the field, whispering, speculating. Someone mentioned old Prohibition bunkers. Another swore it was Cold War fallout storage. But for Evelyn Carter, who arrived pale and trembling after the sheriff's call, the hatch was more than metal in the dirt. It was a possibility. She stood back from the crowd, arms wrapped around herself, staring at the square of steel as if it could breathe. Every instinct screamed that Amelia was tied to this somehow. The silence she had lived with for 8 years was breaking, and in its place came the thrum of fear. "Sheriff!" Evelyn's voice was barely steady. "Open it." Dalton hesitated. Officially, he had to wait for the county to send proper equipment. Torches, cutting tools. But the weight of the town stairs and Evelyn's hollow eyes fixed on him pushed him forward. With the firefighters' help, they wedged a crowbar beneath the handle. The metal groaned, but held. Another firefighter fetched a portable saw, sparks flying as the blade bit into the rust. The smell of burning steel mingled with the lingering smoke from the field. Finally, with a screech that set teeth on edge, the hatch gave way. The men heaved it open, a blast of stale, cold air rising from below. They shined a flashlight down. A narrow ladder descended into darkness. Todd was the first to volunteer. Rope secured to his waist, flashlight clutched tight. He lowered himself into the opening. The air grew colder with each rung, thick with a sour tang of mold, and something else, something metallic like old pennies. When his boots hit concrete, he swept the beam across the space. A room, small, cramped, with walls of poured cement. And in that room, he froze. "Chief!" His voice cracked through the radio, echoing up the ladder. "You need to see this." The others leaned over the opening, the flashlight beam jittering as Todd's hand shook. On the far wall, beneath the grime and dust, was a child's drawing. Stick figures in crayon. A sun in the corner. 2 girls holding hands. Written above in uneven, childish letters. Kinsley and Alara. Gasps erupted above ground. Evelyn staggered, her knees nearly giving way. The crowd pressed closer, their whispers sharp and panicked. The bunker was no storm shelter. It was a prison, and it meant that the 2 girls who had vanished from the schoolyard in 2004 had once been here, alive. The hatch was no longer just a curiosity. It was a crime scene, and the person who had built it was still out there, with 8 years of distance. The hatch yawned open into a mouth of shadows. By dawn, crime scene tape cut across the Kester property. Deputies pushing back onlookers who had camped out through the night. Word of the discovery had spread past Willow Creek, past Iowa, rippling into headlines across the Midwest. Cold case breakthrough. Bunker found in missing girls investigation. Reporters crowded the fence line, lenses glittering in the early sun. The farmhouse where Emelia Carter once clung to scraps of hope became a backdrop for every broadcast. But Evelyn wasn't watching. She stood on the ash-blackened soil, clutching a thermos she couldn't drink from, eyes fixed on the ladder that led down into the dark. She wanted to climb down herself, to breathe the same stale air her daughter must have breathed, to see the walls that closed around Amelia's childhood. But Sheriff Dalton refused. "Evelyn," he said gently, his voice weighted with exhaustion, "you don't want to see what's in there?" But she did. God help her. She did. Inside, forensic teams moved carefully. The bunker was no larger than a farm cellar, maybe 12 by 12 feet. Bare concrete walls, no windows, no natural light. The ladder was bolted steel. No other exit. Whoever had been inside hadn't left by choice. On the floor lay a thin mattress, brittle with age, its springs rusted through. Beside it, a plastic tub filled with children's clothes, small jeans, faded T-shirts with cartoon prints, socks mismatched and frayed. A doll slumped in the corner, its hair half melted from heat or time. Pinned to the wall with nails were more drawings, crayon landscapes, stick figures of girls playing, smiling, holding hands. A series of suns and moons sketched in sequence, as if marking days. One detail chilled the investigators most. Some of the drawings had dates written in a child's uneven scrawl. The earliest, May 2004. The latest, October 2007. For 3.5 years after their disappearance, the girls had been alive in this bunker. Sheriff Dalton rubbed the bridge of his nose as the crime text bagged evidence. "God almighty," he muttered. "They were here the whole time." A deputy whispered, "And then gone again. Why leave?" Dalton didn't answer. He stared at a set of faint scratches on the concrete wall. Tally marks, hundreds of them, clustered together, like someone had tried to keep count. The weight of the room pressed on his chest. The bunker wasn't just evidence. It was testimony. Every object screamed of lives interrupted, of innocence stolen. That night, Evelyn couldn't sleep. Images of the bunker haunted her. The drawings, the tally marks, the mattress that might have held her daughter. The realization gnawed at her. Amelia had lived through years of silence and captivity. But then she had vanished again. Where had she gone? Who had taken her? And why had the trail gone cold after 2007? The farmhouse no longer felt like a refuge. The peeling paint and worn floorboards whispered of ghosts. And when Evelyn shut her eyes, she could almost hear the echo of her daughter's voice in the dark, counting the tally marks one by one. The investigation shifted into overdrive. FBI agents joined local deputies, combing the Kester property for clues. Ground-penetrating radar swept the fields. Cadaver dogs sniffed for graves. They found nothing, but the bunker itself offered one last clue. In the corner, beneath a loose slab of concrete, an evidence tech discovered a small tin lunchbox. Inside were scraps of paper, torn notebook pages with faint, smeared writing. One page carried a single sentence, written in shaky, juvenile hand. "He comes at night." Evelyn Carter read those words in the sheriff's office the next morning, her hands trembling. Her daughter had been alive. Her daughter had suffered. And her daughter had known someone, a man who visited that underground tomb under cover of darkness. For Evelyn, it was worse than death, because it meant Amelia's silence wasn't just grief. It was fear. The girl who returned to her farmhouse 8 years later was not just her daughter. She was a stranger carrying a secret Evelyn wasn't sure she wanted to hear. The days after the bunker's discovery stretched like wire, taut, vibrating with tension. Willow Creek was no longer a sleepy farm town. Federal agents rolled in with black SUVs, setting up temporary offices in the county courthouse. Crime analysts pinned maps and timelines to walls, stringing together 8 years of silence with red twine. Theories sprouted like weeds. Some believed Amelia and Alara had been kept by a drifter, someone passing through who had vanished as suddenly as he appeared. Others whispered about locals, about men who lived in plain sight, but carried darkness under their skin. But no one had answers. For Evelyn, the investigation was a blur of flashing badges and clipped questions. They asked her about Amelia's habits, her routines, her memories. But what memories could a child stolen at 6 possibly hold at 14? Amelia barely spoke. The girl who had returned to the farmhouse felt both familiar and alien. She moved through the rooms like a guest, never quite touching anything, never claiming the space as her own. She flinched at the sound of the back door creaking, stiffened when headlights swept across the window at night. And when she slept, if she slept, the house filled with muffled cries. One night, Evelyn pushed open Amelia's door after hearing the whimpering rise into a strangled sob. The room was dark except for the pale wash of moonlight. Amelia thrashed in her sheets, her voice caught between words and gasps. Evelyn touched her shoulder gently. "Amelia, sweetheart, wake up." The girl bolted upright, eyes wide, chest heaving. For a moment, she didn't recognize her mother. She scrambled back against the headboard, her hands up as if to ward off a blow. "It's me," Evelyn whispered. Her heart broke at the sight of the terror etched across her daughter's face. "It's just me." Amelia blinked, the panic draining slowly, replaced by the hollow stillness that had become her armor. Without a word, she lay back down and turned her face to the wall. Evelyn sat beside her until dawn, listening to her daughter's ragged breathing, wondering what shadows still hunted her in dreams. Meanwhile, the FBI dug into every lead the bunker offered. The drawings, the tally marks, the scraps of notebook paper. A handwriting analyst confirmed the shaky notes belonged to a child, likely Amelia or Alara. The phrase, "he comes at night," became the mantra of the investigation. Who was he? A local farmer? A transit trucker? Someone the girls had known before they vanished? Sheriff Dalton leaned over the table at one late-night strategy meeting. "We're not just looking for who took them," he said, voice gravelly from too much coffee. "We're looking for who let them go, or who moved them, because those drawings stopped in 2007. Something changed. Something big." The silence that followed was louder than shouting. Back at the farmhouse, Evelyn tried to bridge the chasm between her and Amelia. She cooked meals she remembered her daughter loving, macaroni and cheese, cinnamon toast. But Amelia only picked at her food. She avoided eye contact, retreating to her room for hours, the door locked. One afternoon, Evelyn knocked softly before entering. The room smelled faintly of crayon wax. On the desk lay sheets of paper filled with sketches, crude, childlike, but layered with unsettling detail. One drawing showed a door at the end of the hallway. Another showed a ladder descending into a black square. And another, the one that made Evelyn's blood run cold, showed a tall, Faceless man standing in the doorway, his shadow stretching long across the floor. Evelyn picked up the drawing with trembling hands. "Amelia, who is this?" The girl snatched it away, crumpling it, her jaw tight. "No one," she whispered, her first words in days. But her eyes told a different story. The investigation surged, but every step forward ended in mud. Cadaver dogs found nothing. Old neighbors remembered nothing. The Kester family swore they knew nothing. And Evelyn realized something terrifying. The most important witness was living under her roof. But Amelia's silence wasn't just stubbornness. It was survival. And as Evelyn studied her daughter across the dinner table, she couldn't help but wonder, was the man from the drawing still out there? Or worse, did Amelia know exactly who he was? The farmhouse had always been quiet, but now the silence was heavier, a suffocating presence that lived in the walls. Evelyn tried to fill it with conversation, with soft questions and gentle reassurances, but Amelia met her with closed doors and clipped answers. The girl was no longer the 6-year-old who had once drawn suns and stick figures on the fridge. She was 14 now, a stranger who carried the way to places Evelyn couldn't reach. And though Evelyn loved her fiercely, she couldn't deny the truth that crept in during sleepless nights. She didn't recognize her own daughter. The tension came to a head one evening over something trivial. Evelyn had asked Amelia to sit down for dinner, the stew simmering on the stove, filling the kitchen with steam. Amelia stood at the threshold, arms crossed, eyes dark. "Please," Evelyn said, setting 2 bowls on the table. "Just try. We used to eat this together." "I don't remember," Amelia snapped, her voice sharp as glass. Evelyn froze. She had rarely heard her daughter speak with such venom. "You don't remember," Evelyn repeated softly. "Amelia, you love this." "You!" "I said I don't remember." The bowl slipped from Evelyn's hands, shattering on the floor. Broth splashed across her shoes, carrots and potatoes scattering like debris. The kitchen went silent, except for the dripping stew. Evelyn's voice trembled. "Why are you punishing me? I didn't take you. I didn't." But the words died in her throat. Amelia's face had hardened, her jaw clenched as though holding back something far more dangerous than anger. Without another word, she turned and stormed down the hallway, the slam of her bedroom door rattling the house. Evelyn sank to her knees among the shards of porcelain, weeping not just for the broken dinner, but for the widening gulf between them. Meanwhile, the town of Willow Creek simmered with unease. Neighbors who had once comforted Evelyn now whispered about Amelia's behavior. Some said the girl looked wrong, as though something inside her had been twisted in those missing years. Others speculated she was hiding the identity of her captor to protect him, or worse, that she had grown loyal to him. At the grocery store, Evelyn overheard 2 women in the next aisle whispering, "She doesn't act like a victim. Maybe she knows more than she's letting on. She's not the same little girl anymore." Evelyn gripped the shopping cart until her knuckles whitened, biting back tears. The town that once pitted her now eyed her daughter with suspicion. The FBI wasn't kinder. They pressed Evelyn for more access. They wanted Amelia in therapy, in interviews, under observation. Agents showed up at the farmhouse unannounced, hoping to catch the girl in unguarded moments. But Amelia retreated deeper into herself, answering questions with silence or single words. Sheriff Dalton tried to soften the blows. He stopped by with updates, his voice low, his eyes weary. "We've got profiles," he said one evening, sitting at Evelyn's kitchen table. "Men in the county who matched the timeline. Folks with priors, assault, trespassing, worse. But without her cooperation, it's like chasing smoke." Evelyn rubbed her temples. Exhaustion etched into her features. "She's not ready. You can't just force her." Dalton nodded, but his expression was grim. "We don't have forever. Whoever did this, if he's still out there, he's had 8 years to cover his tracks. And if she knows something..." His voice trailed off, but Evelyn understood. If Amelia held the key, the clock was running out. That night, Evelyn stood in the hallway, staring at the thin slice of light beneath her daughter's door. She wanted to knock, to beg Amelia to open up, to tell her everything. But fear rooted her in place. Because deep down, Evelyn wasn't sure she wanted to hear the answers. What if the man Amelia drew wasn't just a nightmare? What if he was someone Evelyn knew? What if Amelia's silence wasn't fear, but protection? The questions clawed at her until she whispered into the dark. "Who are you, Amelia? What did they do to you?" No answer came, only the creak of old floorboards and the house breathing around her, as though the farmhouse itself was holding its secrets tight. The next morning, Evelyn discovered something chilling. On the kitchen counter, beside the untouched breakfast, lay a folded sheet of paper. She opened it with trembling fingers. It was another drawing, a stick figure of a girl standing in front of a farmhouse. Beside her was a tall, faceless man. But this time, there was a third figure, a woman, drawn with longer hair, standing inside the house. Beneath the sketch, in the same shaky handwriting, were 3 words. He was here. The wind carried a strange sound across the fields at night, a low whistle that rose and fell, blending with the rustle of cornstalks. Evelyn woke with her heart pounding, certain it wasn't just a wind. She tiptoed to the window, pulling the curtain aside. Moonlight spilled over the farmhouse yard, silvering the barn, the gravel drive, the lonely swing set that hadn't moved in years. Nothing stirred, and yet the feeling persisted, eyes in the dark, watching, waiting. Evelyn closed the curtain and pressed her back against the wall, her breath ragged. She told herself it was exhaustion, her imagination preying on fear. But when she returned to bed, Amelia's door was cracked open, something she never left that way. Inside, the girl slept uneasily, clutching her pillow as though bracing against some invisible force. On the desk by the window lay another folded sheet of paper. Evelyn picked it up, her pulse spiking. A drawing. This time, the farmhouse again, but outside the window, a pair of eyes floated in the darkness. Beneath it, Amelia had written, "He's still here." The next day, Evelyn demanded answers. "Amelia, what does this mean?" she asked, holding the drawing out. "Who is he? How do you know he's here?" Amelia's face went pale. Her lips trembled, but she said nothing. Instead, she turned away, staring out the window at the endless Iowa fields. "Amelia, please." Evelyn's voice cracked. "I can't protect you if you don't tell me." The girl finally whispered, "He never left. He's been watching us, even before you found me." Evelyn staggered back as though struck. "What do you mean before?" But Amelia clamped her mouth shut, retreating to her room. That same week, the FBI's focus shifted. Agents had combed through the list of men who once worked the Kessler farm, narrowing it down to those who had ties to the elementary school. One name rose to the top, Frank Yates, the former foreman's son. He had worked odd jobs around the community, volunteered occasionally at the school's sports events, and had been seen on the property in the early 2000s. His record was dotted with misdemeanors, trespassing, drunk and disorderly, but nothing that screamed predator. Still, his familiarity with the land and proximity to the girls raised alarms. Sheriff Dalton paid Evelyn a visit, his tone cautious. "We've got someone we're looking at. Nothing concrete yet, but we're digging. You just need to be careful. Lock your doors. Don't let Amelia out of your sight." Evelyn nodded, but inside she wanted to scream. Careful? The monster had already walked through her life, stolen her daughter, carved 8 years out of their souls. How could caution stop someone who had already proven himself a ghost? That night, Evelyn sat awake at the kitchen table, a cup of untouched coffee cooling in her hands. Outside, the yard light flickered against the barn. Each shadow looked like a man's silhouette, each creak of the floorboards like footsteps. At midnight, a knock rattled the front door. She froze. The sound came again, harder this time. Evelyn crept to the peephole, but saw nothing, only darkness. She didn't open it. She stood there trembling until the knocking stopped. When she finally gathered the courage to step outside, the gravel drive was empty, but in the dirt beneath the doorframe, she spotted it. The print of a boot heel fresh in the soil. The next morning, Amelia was gone. Evelyn screamed towards the farmhouse as she searched room to room, her hands shaking so violently she could barely turn doorknobs. The front door was still locked from the inside. Amelia's shoes were still by the door, but her bed was empty. On the pillow lay another drawing, a stick-figure girl, standing alone in the field. Next to her, the faceless man, and beneath them, in jagged letters, for words that made Evelyn's blood run cold. You can't stop him. The sirens shattered the quiet dawn. Red and blue lights painted the old Kessler farmhouse as Sheriff Dalton and a fleet of deputies swarmed the property. Evelyn stood barefoot on the porch, her face pale, her hands trembling as she clutched Amelia's latest drawing. "She's gone," Evelyn whispered, her voice hollow. She was right here. She was in her bed. Now she's gone. Dalton's weathered face hardened, his jaw clenched tight. "We'll find her," he said, though his tone lacked conviction. "But I need you to tell me everything. Did you hear anything last night?" Evelyn's throat closed. The knock, the boot print, the feeling of eyes on her. She wanted to say it all, but some deep-rooted fear silenced her. She only managed. Someone was here. Someone came for her. Dalton's men fanned out into the fields, their flashlights cutting jagged beams to the rows of tall, whispering corn. Each step sounded like bones cracking beneath their boots. Dogs were brought in, straining at their leashes, noses pressed low to the ground. They caught the scent, and it led straight into the corn. Meanwhile, the FBI was zeroing in on Frank Yates. His truck had been spotted 2 nights earlier near the old schoolhouse, abandoned now, but placed tied directly to Amelia's past. Agents found cigarette butts, a half-empty whiskey bottle, and a crude sketchbook hidden in the cab of his vehicle. Inside the notebook were drawings, houses, barns, stick-figure girls, and one image that made the lead agent's blood run cold, the Kessler farmhouse. Back at the property, Evelyn refused to stay behind. Lantern in hand, she pushed the corn alongside Dalton's deputies, the blades cutting her arms and face as she forced her way deeper into the field. The corn closed in like a maze, every turn disorienting, every shadow stretching like a figure standing just out of reach. Then came the sound, a giggle, faint, childlike. "Amelia!" Evelyn screamed, her voice cracking. "Amelia, it's me. Come to me." The giggle faded, swallowed by the night. And then, clear as a bell, a man's voice echoed back. "She's mine now." Panic erupted. Deputies fumbled with their flashlights, beams slicing wildly through the corn. The dogs barked frantically, pulling in circles, confused by overlapping scents. Dalton barked orders, his voice tight with urgency, but only added to the chaos. Evelyn spun in place, the lantern trembling in her grip. Her heart thundered. Then she saw it, a figure standing at the far edge of the row. Tall, motionless, watching. "Stop! Police!" a deputy shouted, raising his weapon. The beam of a flashlight cut across the figure, but there was nothing there, just stalks of corn swaying in the breeze. Hours dragged by. The search combed every inch of the property, every barn, every cellar. They found scraps of Amelia's drawings scattered like breadcrumbs, weighted with stones as if deliberately left behind. On the final page was a crude map, a rectangle with a cross through the center. Beneath it, Amelia had written one word in shaky letters: basement. Evelyn's stomach dropped. She thought of the old storm cellar under the barn, a place no one had entered in years. The boards had been nailed shut after the roof caved in, but the memory of it pressed heavy in her mind. Dalton ordered it pried open. Deputies tore at the boards, splinters flying, the wood shrieking as nails gave way. A foul, damp odor rushed out, the smell of earth and rot. Lantern light spilled into the gaping hole. Stairs descended into darkness. Dalton turned to Evelyn, his face grim. "Stay back." But Evelyn shook her head. "She's down there. I know she is." Without waiting for permission, she stepped toward the yawning black, her lantern casting long, quivering shadows down the steps. The air grew colder with each step. The walls dripped with moisture. At the bottom, she saw something scrawled in chalk across the stone wall, jagged letters, uneven, frantic. "Welcome back." And in the corner, barely visible in the flickering light, lay a bundle of fabric, Evelyn's heart stopped. It was Amelia's dress. The cellar swallowed every sound. Evelyn's lantern flickered, its flame quivering as though afraid of the air itself. Sheriff Dalton and 2 deputies descended behind her, their flashlights cutting harsh beams through the damp black. The chalk words, "Welcome back," loomed across the wall, smeared by a small, trembling hand. "Evelyn," Dalton said quietly, "don't touch anything. This is a crime scene." But Evelyn ignored him. She fell to her knees before the bundle of fabric. The faded blue cotton, Amelia's dress, still smelled faintly of smoke and mildew. Her fingers shook as she lifted it to her chest. "She was here," Evelyn whispered. "He brought her back here." One of the deputies swept his light across the cellar. The beam revealed chains bolted to the wall, rusted manacles, the kind used on livestock, only smaller, modified. Beside them, a cracked porcelain doll sat upright on a wooden crate, its painted eyes fixed eternally forward. Dalton's breath hitched. "Dear God!" Then came the sound, a faint scrape, from deeper in the cellar, beyond the half-rotted beams. "Amelia?" Evelyn's voice cracked. The deputies raised their weapons, flashlights swinging toward the far wall. A section of brick had been broken through, revealing a narrow tunnel carved crudely by hand. The scrape grew louder, a shuffle, a dragging sound, and then a figure emerged. At first, Evelyn thought it was Amelia, the small frame, the thin arms. But when the light fell across the face, her blood turned to ice. The girl's eyes were empty, unfocused. Her lips quivered in silence. She wasn't Amelia. She was younger, maybe 10, pale, malnourished. Dalton lunged forward, wrapping his coat around the child. "We need medics." "Now," he barked. Evelyn staggered back. Her lantern slipped from her hand, shattering against the dirt floor. The cellar fell into shadows, broken only by the deputy's quivering beams. And in that darkness, she saw him, at the mouth of the tunnel. Tall, still, his face shrouded, as though the shadows clung tighter around him than anywhere else in the room. "Who are you?" Dalton demanded, gun raised. The figure tilted his head, the motion impossibly slow. Evelyn felt her legs give way. The memories crashed down. The years of silence, the drawings, the feeling of eyes on her even in her sleep. It was him, always him, the faceless man. Dalton fired. The blast echoed through the cellar like thunder. Dust rained from the beams overhead. But when the light swept across the tunnel again, he was gone, vanished. Above ground, chaos erupted. Medics rushed the rescued child to an ambulance. Deputies combed the property, radios crackling with urgent chatter. But there was no sign of Amelia, no sign of him. Evelyn sat on the porch steps as dawn crept across the horizon. The cornfield glowed gold in the rising sun, peaceful, as though the night's horrors had been nothing but a fever dream. Dalton approached, his face grave. "We'll find her," he said. Evelyn looked at him, her eyes hollow. "You don't understand," she whispered. "He's been here all along. He'll never stop." Her gaze drifted across the field. For a moment, she thought she saw him again, a tall silhouette between the rows of corn, standing perfectly still. She blinked. The field was empty. But when she looked down at her hands, she realized the blue dress she clutched was gone, vanished like the girl who wore it. The farmhouse stood silent, the cellar sealed once more. The chalk words remained on the wall, scrawled by a desperate hand. "Welcome back." And in the silence of Willow Creek, the faceless man waited,